Call the City of Apache Junction work session to order. Roll call.
Mayor Sturdy,
Here.
Vice Mayor Wilson,
Here.
Councilmember Barker, Councilmember Evans,
Here.
Councilmember Rizzi,
Present.
Councilmember Schroeder,
Here.
Councilmember Struble.
Here.
You have a quorum, Your Honor.
Presentation and discussion on resolution number 2024, a resolution of the mayor and city council of Apache Junction, certain document file for the amendments to Apache Junction City Code noise. Joel, do we want to mix these two? Is that possible? So we'll also be talking presentation and discussion on ordinance number 1492 on the same subject. So, Joel, you're listed here. Would you kick that off?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, good evening. I believe this can be done very quickly, but some people disagree with me. So what I'd like to do is go through the documents that have been put online and as directed by the city council. So the first thing I did was I created a memo that tried to explain everything generally and the direction to staff. There were basically two. One was to use the Pinal County's ordinance as a base. In other words, adding the decibel charts and also some language. And the second one was identify all city codes so that a resident would be able to see the city codes in one location. That was very important to the council, both of those items. There was initially a request to do decibel research, but once the council clarified their direction to staff, we stopped doing the research on it because you decided to do decibels. So I do want to point out that, yeah, there's some clerical mistakes. One was there's two page threes. I apologize for that. It was a page issue for, I think, under Word. I can't control that. And also, there was one section that should have been green on page 15, and we'll get to that under exceptions. Going to page 2 of the memo, there's question marks throughout the document. And they're red, and I think each one of those need to be discussed by council, if at all possible, because I need further direction to refine this ordinance, because it needs some refinement. It's too long, but it's up to you. It's going to be your document. I do want to point out there are two state code sections, that even if you pass this or a rendition of this, those two state code sections are still applicable to noise. However, if you pass this ordinance and you direct the city police chief, this is what you want enforced, at least as to certain types of noise, then the general nuisance code section, the 132917, which I have attached, by the way, as well as 132904, those won't be used in certain noise situations. There is an emergency clause attached to this ordinance. What that means is, and from what I have heard from the council, this is urgent. You want this passed urgently, and so you don't want to pass it and then have 30 days to wait. So,
Can I interrupt?
yes.
But we've also been a city since 1978. I think if we want to spend as long as we need to get it right, I mean, we don't have to rush through something, so.
Absolutely. But what I heard was you wanted this passed quickly, and if you don't, we'll take the emergency clause off. It's very easy. For the emergency clause to pass, it needs to be 6 out of 7. So, and if it doesn't, and it passes with a majority, then the ordinance still passes, and there's still a 30-day period before it's effective.
Your Honor.
Yes.
So the urgency behind this matter was brought up because of the valid recourse of bringing in the county sheriff to take over some noise ordinances or, complaints within the businesses. That's why we decided to say, you know, there was some pushback on it. Some people didn't feel it was necessary, and so that's why. We're like, well, let's just get this done so we don't have to go through that. It wasn't a matter of, let's just push this thing through. We were doing it to be considerate of the people that didn't feel that the county should have to come in and handle some of these noise complaints. So let's not make it seem like that, you know, we're just like, hey, let's just let's just push this through because we want to push it through. We did that because to be considerate of the other people that didn't care for the idea of the county coming in.
They're my thoughts,
Your Honor.
too. Yes.
And I would agree with Councilmember Schroeder, and I would also agree with you but with the respect that we also didn't expect to have 20 pages of comparisons between counties and other cities in our current ordinance to look over. And so, yes, it's important, and we do want to get this through so that we can move forward, but at the same time, we want to get it right. And there's a lot here, so we want to get it right. We do want it to go through quickly, but I think it's more important to get it right.
Your Honor,
Yes.
I have a question for Joel. So whether we do this tonight or tomorrow night or next meeting, if one of the things when we originally talked about this, we had decided to wait to see if the state had initiated the item that went through them that ended up going nowhere. So if the state in this next legislature session does the same thing again, no matter what we do here tonight, it kind of throws it out, and then we have to follow what the state says, correct?
Absolutely. The state can preempt every city and town if they want to say you can't, you're not regulating noise, we are, and that's our purview. And they've done that on other things, and they can do that. The law allows them to do that. So yes.
Okay, thank you.
And just to clarify, the emergency clause isn't about us pushing something through quickly. It's about when and if something does get passed, it is effective as of immediately, as opposed to generally waiting for 30 days to have it done.
Yeah, and the intent wasn't to second guess, but what I had heard was you wanted this done quickly, and so that's why that was added. And we
All
can
right.
certainly take it off.
If you want to continue then.
Yes, please. I want to tell you what the difference is before we get into the text of a subjective versus objective standard of proof. Currently, the state code, as well as your music code, your music noise code, uses a subjective standard. So what is the subjective standard? That is something that's based on opinion, it's based on personal experience, and how people were influenced by their personal feelings. So an objective standard is more of a scientific, factual, measured type of evidence. And that is decibel reading. That's what objective is. So you'll see that in this section. And so when I say subjective, that's the current way where if someone complains about noise, they can say how it affected their sleeping or their property or their activities on their property. Whereas if there's a noise violation that's determined by a decibel meter, anything above that amount would be a violation. Okay, the ordinance is just standard language, and same with the resolution. The ordinance is the document that adopts the code that you're authorizing by reference. And then the resolution is the document that declares it a public record. That's important because if this thing remains to be 19 pages, then to publish that, you have to publish any ordinance that you pass. You have to publish it in the paper. So instead of publishing the actual text, you would publish the ordinance that's only 2 pages or 3 pages, and so you'll avoid a huge publication cost. That's why we're doing it that way. or may do it that way. Next, there's a decibel scale chart that we found a bunch of examples. This seemed to be one of the best ones, and it relates to the decibel level and then what the item would be that's causing the sound. So that was just to compare noises. That's why that is in the packet. There's also another chart called noise levels by decibels, sorry. And that's from the CDC or the NIOSH. NIOSH is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Those are the people in the trenches who regulate machinery, and they're the ones who basically say, here are what the decibels are, and they are the ones that have all sorts of safety standards that go along with those types of activities. So now, I'd like to go to the actual documents. Starting on page 1. This language, under section 11-1-1, talks about, it's an introduction to the ordinance, and I think that's what the intent was. And this came from an early rendition that Mr. Schroeder passed through council. There's,
Your Honor.
Can I ask questions?
oh, everybody can ask questions,
Yes.
please.
Okay. Is this section necessary? It is subjective in B, and it may just be B. But we have a chart that deals with A, so it's already in there. And when you begin with the applicability section on 11.1.2, it tells you what this is. So my question is this particular language even necessary?
Legally, it's not. However, it's a policy decision if you want it in there. Although I will say, if you're going to adopt the chart with the decibel levels, then you've got, starting with the third full paragraph, I think that's a problem with A, B, and C.
Absolutely.
That would conflict under the objective versus
Right.
subjective standard.
And C is subjective, B is subjective.
And
so-
A would conflict possibly with the hours, so.
Right.
So you might want to question whether those should be in there. That's why the question mark is there.
No.
Your Honor.
Yes.
Joel, or I don't know if the question's for Joel or for the rest of the council. Joel, as you go through this document, do you prefer that we ask questions as you go through each section? Or is it going to be easier to wait till the end? Personally, I prefer to go through each section to ask so we don't get confused.
I agree, and I think, I mean, if you're not ready to make a decision on a certain item, we can come back to it. But yes, that would be a lot easier.
Okay, thank you.
So I don't know if a decision can be made on that, but we're just at the beginning. If you want to come back, we can come back to it.
I don't think we need to have this part in there, this first opening part right now.
Do you
And-
want us to just say if we want it or don't want it? What's the easiest way for you to say what we want or don't want?
Just tell me what you want to do, and I will then continue on.
I'd like to see it deleted.
I say it's not necessary as well.
Okay. I'll agree.
Is that pretty much it then on that? Okay. Okay, going to the first page 3, which is really page 2. Applicability, that is pretty good. The authority, I had to change that from the county. And remember, yellow is county language with some minor changes mostly. And then the blue would be city, and then green would be from other organizations, or I didn't know where it came from. So I had to,
Blue is very hard to read, too, for my vision, by the way.
sorry about,
Very difficult. Yep.
well, okay, I'm sorry about that. When we did the Word version, it was a lot worse. So the Word version blacked it out basically with blue, and you couldn't even read the language, so.
Okay, maybe pink,
You know, I have a pink pen, we can do
different
that.
light colors that, yeah.
Or if it could be more transparent, use color, but maybe more transparent.
Okay, The statutory reference is 9 dash, this is under 11.1-3. Instead of the county provisions, I put in Title 9, dealing with cities and towns, so I changed that.
Before you go on in that same section, the second paragraph, it says at or above certain noise levels. And in 11.115, 5, I don't know which, no, 1.5, it says excessive, when it defines excessive noise, it says exceeds. So either it's got to be above it, or we have to change the other area. So it has to exceed the decibel.
Okay, which section and page are you
I
on?
think it's 11.1.5 under excessive noise, page 3, second area.
So
Any
it's the-
sound measured according to which exceeds the level. So it can't be added, it has to exceed it.
Okay.
Oh, so you're saying in the paragraph above, it is hereby declared to be policy. So that second sentence says the same thing, at and above certain levels.
Yeah, but at is not exceeding it.
Right.
So we need to get rid of at and. Just
in
delete
both
at
places.
and. Above certain levels, such noises is unreasonable.
That's, okay.
Thank you.
And I want to say these instead of certain levels, if that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I had it circled, but I didn't say it yet.
Now, what this section does, if we do that, it'll say above these levels, such noises are unreasonable, excessive, and detrimental to the health and welfare of the residents of the city. So what that means is, you're saying when it's unreasonable, excessive, and detrimental, that means it's higher than the decibel level. That's what that means. So I just want to clarify that. Okay, going to 11.1.4. This is the actual authorization section for a citation, or it's actually, this makes it illegal. This is it says, it shall be unlawful. So that's what, you are passing a law that says it shall be unlawful. 11.1-5 are definitions. And I didn't really play with those at all, except for some clerical minor things. I do have a question mark on real page 3 under property line, and we can discuss that a little later, but
Okay, yeah,
Because
that's better, because it
depends-
comes up later.
yes, and it depends what
Yes.
standard you're going to use from where the measurement of the noise will be. So we'll come back to that one.
Okay.
Joe, I have a question real quick. And maybe I should wait, but where it comes into the enforceability or a person receiving a citation, one of the questions that I will have is if there's any warnings, or if it just goes straight to a citation.
Yeah, if we could come back to that, but there will be a warning, but we'll come back to that if we could, because it's further down in the
Okay.
document.
Okay.
Okay. Going to page 4. This is 11.1-6, measurement requirement. Mr. Wilson was very particular on what type of device should be used. And so this calls it it says a sound level meter satisfying at least the applicable requirements for type 2 sound level meters. So type 2 in the industry is a certain type that they use, and that is specified. And so that would have to be, if you ever want to change it, you'd have to go back in here and amend the code if you don't like the type 2 for some reason. But I wanted just to point that out. Some cities, they talked about a type 1, but we don't have to get into a big discussion, but this is just a technical thing but I thought I should bring it to your attention. Okay, 11.1.7. This is the noise application that sets up the table. So, land use noise, what we did for the tables County had certain zoning classifications. So those are not exactly ours. So I did exactly how the county had it, which puts it out as residential, commercial or business, industrial, rural, and those are the categories. So we have comparable zoning districts, and that's exactly what we did. And we used the same times that they had, because the council said use the same table, and that's what we did.
Sorry.
Your Honor?
Yes, Robin's going to go first. Chris.
Okay, on residential, it seems to me that you need to go, instead of 8, you need to go to 10. I mean, it's unreasonable to expect, especially when you look at these decibels, normal conversation is not the same thing as saying, hey, you guys, it's really glad to see you, et cetera. So you could, just by greeting somebody who's out by the curb, you could be breaking this thing. I think it needs to go till 10 o'clock. At least give them that. And also, rural and residential, it seems to me should be the same. Why the difference?
Yes, same
10
question.
o'clock for both of them.
Yeah.
Well, the county wrote it that way, and I was just mimicking it as
Okay.
you wanted, so I
So
can't.
can we change it?
We can, we could
Okay,
put
good.
rural. So you want rural combined with residential, correct?
A lot of things about the county need straightened out.
Yeah, and I would like to see the
Okay,
7 to 8 be 7 to 10 instead of 7 to 8.
and that's in every classification of zoning, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So everything
So
will be 10 o'clock for the stop time,
Yeah.
So,
and start time for the lower decibel, correct?
so I would say in the 65 to 60 would be the range as well. So it's even across the board, and
Say again, Chip, I'd clarify. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
the limits,
Mm-hmm.
65 for the 7 to 10, and then go down to 60 from 10 to, we're saying 7.
Works for me.
So,
What about
Krista-
the decibel number?
Yes.
Krista, are you ready?
Yeah. Joel, we kind of skipped over the 11.16 real quick question where it talks about calibration. My question for that would be, how often does an instrument get calibrated? Does that need to be, do we need to have that in there? Does it get calibrated every 3 years, 5 years, 6 months for accuracy? Do we need anything in there that talks about how often something's calibrated? Or is there a standard for this type of instrument on how often it's supposed to get calibrated to know that it's working properly?
I think the way it's written is fine because it sets a standard, and I think you're okay with that. But if you want to be more specific, we can, and I'd ask the police department to speak on it if you want to ask them their research with other cities and how they calibrate it. That's if you want to ask.
And also, a lot of the meters are, I'm going to say, their history is, I'm going to say, monitored by the people that do the calibrations, and they come forward with a recommendation on the intervals between certification.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as we're following, their recommendations, I'm going to take it on for an example. When I was working with them, they were done every year. We had them, and then after running a series of, I will say, history, it was determined that they didn't need to be done. They were being done every year. They were being done too often. And they turned around and increased the intervals to almost 2 years.
Okay.
Well, in courts, I can tell you if they're not calibrated correctly, and there's a challenge, and you could ask the prosecutor, but he can tell you that he'd have to put a witness on that says it was calibrated correctly, and if it wasn't, the case would get thrown out.
So, before we would go to purchase anything like this, the information regarding how often and who has to, and the expense of calibrating one of these machines can be determined, correct?
It's up to the manufacturer's specifications.
So we can say no to this brand, but yes to this brand, depending on that.
Okay. Why don't you advise? That's the only thing you can say, though.
Speak up.
We're going to be
speak
here
up.
till 12.
I can't say good evening, Mayor and City
No,
Council.
no.
Anyway, any questions you might have, Captain or Commander Freeman will answer them, but we don't have any problem calibrating each time we take the equipment out. So we could do it daily or before each event. It's not that problematic from the information if we have in the Class 2 or Type 2. It's
Okay.
relatively simple.
Thank you.
That's
Your
good.
Honor,
Yes,
I have
Robin?
Another question. You skipped the violation section, which is above the chart, where you had a question mark,
Yes,
and that has the 100 feet mark there.
yes.
Do we
and
want to discuss that now, or do we want to continue
I
to
was going to
wait?
wait, but you know what?
It's
If,
there,
if you're done with the chart,
yeah.
we could go back to that.
So the,
I wanted to
The,
establish that first, the chart violation. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
okay, so after looking at this, and I talked to Joel, and I also talked to Chip, and it seemed pretty reasonable to establish a distance from the footprint of the structure so that all structures would be created equal, rather than going to a property line, which a police officer might not know where it is, or what have you. If we created a 20-foot from the footprint or 25 feet from the footprint, then that would establish, an area. It could be front yard, side yard, backyard, whatever.
Of the person that's making the complaint.
Right, of the person who's complaining.
Robin, can you clarify that? What do you mean by footprint?
A footprint is the structure of the foundation, where the foundation of the house is.
Bless you.
So that if you're on the front porch and you have your foundation under you, then the police could measure 25 feet from that, and they have those little laser things that measure footage, and they could stand there and use their decibel reader, and that would give them a reading at that point.
Thank you.
So you want to go from the house out
From the house out,
instead
yeah.
of the proper line in,
Yeah,
which
because
could make the measurement 30 feet inside the property line.
it could do that, but the thing is that the police officer doesn't know where that property line is.
Sure.
Any of the property lines, be it the business or the complainant, they don't have the foggiest idea where that property line is, nor should they have to.
Yeah, and we don't need to have a requirement to having to bring in a surveyor to
No,
find out exactly where the line is.
absolutely.
Go from the front porch,
I agree.
basically. And
Yeah, from wherever. If they're sitting in the back having a good time and they feel like this noise is intruding on them, then they would say, we were on the back porch, and the officer can go to the back, go 25 feet or 20, whichever you
towards the
prefer,
source.
and determine whether the noise is excessive.
I agree with that.
Mr. Struble, sir, you're laughing. That means that you have something in your head.
No, just having to bring a surveyor in kind of
Yeah,
defeats the whole
oh,
purpose.
okay, gotcha.
I'm sorry. that was just-
So what feet are you recommending? Because this says 100 feet, so you're saying 25 feet from,
From the footprint,
okay, so
20, 25, whatever, Whatever you-
basically from the front of the house.
22 and a half.
22 and a half.
Or from wherever they're making the complaint about the sound. If
Wherever the
it's in the
foundation
backyard,
is.
Yeah.
would be the back of the property.
So I'm hearing 20 feet from the building footprint, and we'll take out from the property line, correct?
Yeah, and that means that you have to go back to
Take out the definition.
definitions and take that definition out
Okay.
and define a footprint.
Measurement, yeah.
So is that a consensus on that issue?
Robert, you had talked earlier in this conversation about 30 feet. Are you good with the 20 feet from the footprint?
Well, the earlier conversation was 30 feet in from the property line towards the house. This is suggesting from the home or from wherever they're saying they're at. So let's say they're on their front porch. 20 feet towards the source of where the noise is coming from that point. So in reality, that could be from the property line, that could be 40 feet in.
Yeah.
You know, depending on now if you're happen to be, you know, you figure you always got a setback, you know, right? And then you've got some yard, then you got the porch. So I would say 20 feet from the footprint, coming even from the front of the house, you're still within the 20, 30 foot, in worst case scenario, of the property line. Now, if you have someone with an 1.25 acre lot, and let's say their house is set back, I mean, they could be a football field from the property line, if you go 20 feet from the house. So, it's just kind of the opposite, you know, instead of, because when we were talking the 30 feet, we were talking from property line in, but this is from footprint out. Does that clarify?
Yes.
Okay, so we're done with that one?
So, back to this chart, we're gonna talk later about start times for construction crews other than these 7 AMs, correct?
Yes,
That comes
please.
later.
Yeah.
Yes,
every-
that's a good one.
While we're here, did everybody get an email from the Home Builders Association?
Yeah.
today?
I did.
I didn't read it, so
Well, can we go to that later? Because it's coming up.
absolutely.
Okay,
I can make a comment on that one.
well, not right now.
Oh, no, all right. Joel's tight, huh?
Okay.
Moving us forward.
And on B,
Now, B is an issue, and I had a constituent contact me about this one, about if it's a lower decibel for the zone. Say you have an area where a zoning area, and the sound carries over into another zoning area.
but since we changed the chart, that won't matter.
It will not, but
It reads the same, 65 till 10 o'clock. So there is no issue there. So that
Well-
can be deleted.
are we doing, I only heard one person say 65 for 60, we should probably go through line by line, because I don't want to mess this up. So, under residential, and we're going to call it rural, also, we'll add the code sections. You're going to change it from 7 to 10. However, the 60 dBA, do you want that to be 65?
Yes.
Okay, that's that line. How about the next one where it says 55 for the other time periods?
60,
Say again?
60.
Yeah, according to this, that's normal conversation. Surely people should be able to speak in a conversational tone in their own house.
Okay, and so 65 for the next category is fine? And 60 is fine? That's, how about industrial? Right now it says 70.
Well, that's considered on your decibel chart, that's considered loud. Industrial is pretty loud as it is. I would say leave it.
I think so.
Okay, so it's industrial. How about the lower amount, 65? For the other hours, 10 PM to 7 AM? Is that what you'd
You
like?
know,
That could be hurting businesses in the future or in
We
industry that
do
we're trying to
have-
attract.
Yeah, we do have industrial areas that back up to residential, done on like Tomahawk and that. I don't think they should be able to do 70 until 10.
Well, here's the thing about those is, there's an area, what is it, off Tomahawk, industrial, like Gail said, in a residential area that has tow trucks. So if a tow truck is coming and going, doing roadside assistance in the middle of the night during their normal business hours, because for them that's normal, just simply driving down the street, like the mayor just said, are we going to start impacting the ability to do business now?
Yeah, I would say if we're gonna err, we wanna err on the upper side, not the lower side.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah, an industrial area.
So are we good with 70
So
then?
leave it 70 to 60.
And then 65 for the lower?
Yeah.
You want to leave it? Okay. And then rural is going to be put into residential, so we're done with that one. Okay. Going to page,
What about
What
B?
about,
oh, yeah, vehicle noise, I want to talk about that. There's a chart on the next page, but I think we need to start with the city code provision is in blue. And this talks about one of the vehicle sections, I should say, offensive use of motor vehicles. This is a subjective standard.
yes,
So my question is to you, and you'll see more sections in here that, yes, they're noise, and they talk about noise, but do you want these decibel readings to be applicable to them? That is the question. And if you don't, you still want to reference them because you want someone to be able to say, okay, what other noise violations could possibly be in the city? You could reference them, and in that section, it can say, this chapter is not applicable to the following code sections. And that would take care of some of these odd noise provisions, like this one, for example.
Joel, could we have the chief or, and whoever is wanting to speak to this, tell us if they actually would be reading the noise of these vehicles with a decimal reader? I mean, is this something that you would routinely do? A car goes down a local street and,
Mayor, council members, it's difficult to gauge a moving vehicle. So you've got a subjective object that's moving distances.
Right.
So it's going to be difficult to do that.
okay, that's what I wanted. Thank you.
And I think there are other transportation code violations we could probably cover with that.
They do come under nuisances and that kind of thing with ferries.
Correct.
Okay,
So wait, if I could ask, just to clarify. So this section that talks about you making noise because of your vehicle, that's going to be up to the officer at the time. And the officer would write a report that would bolster any kind of citation, correct?
Correct.
So it's up to that officer's basically subjective standard.
Correct. And in addition, we'd have to locate the vehicle in question. And then we didn't observe the misdemeanor, so we couldn't take action.
But if you did,
If we did, yeah, you're right.
if you did, you could cite someone.
We could cite, but the problem is you have to catch the vehicle first.
Right.
So-
Okay. And not all officers are going to have decibel readers, are they?
Not all officers will.
At 24 hours a day?
No, sir.
Okay.
And I also agree with not using it because of, like you said, the vehicle is moving, and it's also determined that, yes, being part of the group of young individuals that was raised up, that, decided to make the cars even louder because of, say, putting in smaller exhaust systems and everything. You learned how to, I'll say, drive the vehicle quieter when you were in a position, and, trying to reproduce that sound that you may have done somewhere else would be, I'm going to say, very hard to do because, yes, you're accelerating a little slower, not doing it quite as loud. It would be very hard to determine for a vehicle.
So can I start a list then of sections that will not be applicable, and I can then add that into
to
this
the
code?
exemptions.
Okay, so that's
So
the
the
first one.
vehicle section would not be applicable.
Yep.
All right, that's,
And could we
Helpful.
also, while we're doing that, could we move the screeching tires into the vehicle section? It's way in the back.
when we get there, yeah.
Yeah,
I agree,
move
yes,
that in.
absolutely.
Thank you, and take the subjectivity out of some of this stuff.
My
Okay.
son remembers that one.
So the chart,
Taking the baffles out of the exhaust.
so I don't know if you want to have this
No,
chart for vehicles. That's up to you. If you don't, we can take it out and leave it up to the officers.
Nope.
take it out.
Is that, Mr. Schroeder, is that fine?
That's fine.
So I'm going to strike that completely, okay?
And we have redundancy throughout this? Can you grab some of those and throw them out?
Well, there's a lot of that, so yes, I will
But I
attempt to
mean-
do that.
You know, like 4D is redundant to 4A, B, and C, and says basically the same thing.
Okay. So when we're gonna do that, we're going to remove, so for vehicle repairs, for example, under number 3, that has certain hours. So I don't know what you want to do with that. Do you want to put that in an exemption for hours? Or if we're not going to use the decibel chart, then I guess we don't really need that. But, because it does say as to table 1. So that's what you mean by the redundancies, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So I could remove that then. And mufflers, that's kind of the same thing, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's going to be an exempt one also. Now, the city code provision, under D, on page 6, that is also a subjective standard for mufflers. So I can put that in the exempt provision. Is that correct?
Well, and it's also redundant of the A
Yes,
above it, so
yes.
But we're
Okay.
getting rid of
you don't need it.
section 4A, B, and C, right?
They're not
Well,
necessary.
D is a current code section in the city.
Right, so that's what I'm saying, we just decided to get rid of pretty much from the top of the table down to where your blue is with the question marks.
Yep.
Okay?
We could do that, that's just the opposite, but sure.
All right, and how about going to number 5 on page 6? Motorized skateboards, this one goes on to the next page, but the noise provision is under subsection H. So that's also a subjective standard. So I would suggest that you'd say that you're not repealing that code provision, but you're saying it doesn't, the chapter 11 does not apply to it,
Right,
correct?
correct.
Still under the exemption.
Okay. Okay, sound amplification. So this is not necessarily the vehicle, but it's speakers that are emitting noises or other things. So this is a city code provision. And
City code,
I think that's the same thing, correct? Exempt?
city code.
Okay. Well, good, we're on page 8. So,
Joe, I had a quick question.
sure.
Going back to the motorized skateboards, seems like we really hate motorized skateboards with all the things we have on them. Now I didn't hear what it is we're doing with that section. We're saying that this is exempt because we have a different code.
Yeah, we're going to basically take AJ City Code Section 10-7-4, put it under we're going to reference that section and say Chapter 11, meaning the decibel levels do not apply to the entire section.
Okay,
It's going to go to the list of exemptions.
okay.
Okay, loud radios, we're on page 8.
No, that's what we've.
I'm
moved
sorry.
back.
Let's see. No, loud radios and sound sets, that's the county's provision.
Yep.
So this one, I think, is similar
Mm-hmm.
to those. So
Yep.
I don't know if you even want to include this at all.
Nope.
Can this be stricken?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, now we get to one of the more famous ones in the city. This one is music. This is number 2, under 10-1-12A. And this is music that is allowed to be played or permitted to be played with any musical instrument or instrument. This has the subjective standard. And this kind of mirrors, actually it does mirror, the state statute that talks about nuisance. So on this one, this would conflict if there's a music issue, but the officer would probably be using Chapter 11 for any noise and would not use the music one. You can repeal it, you could amend it, we'd have to probably do the amendment in a we'd have to change the ordinance itself. It could be done, but I don't know if, I think you want to put that in a different section also, saying this does not apply, the decibel readings do not apply to this. That's the simplest way to do it. Does that sound sensible to you?
I think this doesn't really go for radios particularly because it has restaurants, hotels, etc. in it also. I mean, it seems like it's a whole different ball game here.
Well, it's for music, it's not for any other type of sound, so it's,
Okay,
because it
so
talks about
if we
music.
put a period after device or means, or not a period, but a comma, and put amplified or non-amplified, and then referred it to the decibel chart, it would come under the decibel readings, and got rid of the rest of that sentence so that there was no
Well,
subjectivity,
if I may, music's already covered
right?
under your decibel chart. So, because that's any kind of sound. So you don't really need to amend
Right.
this.
If that's the case, then this needs to go,
Then we
because
can
it
do that.
becomes confusing.
Consider it gone if that's okay with all of
Okay.
you.
Mm-hmm. There's two things that, caught my eye in this and something right before this, and I know that we're scrapping them, but where it says considerable number of people,
Yes,
that would have been something I questioned. And the other one was, where it says, people that are reasonable. That's, I mean, I don't know how we would consider who is.
Reasonability is subjective, but a
Well-
considerable number of people comes straight out of the state statute.
there's state
Okay.
statute and there's also common law that talks about that. And those are some old laws, and it's an antiquated section. So I will do a special section here that repeals it,
Okay.
okay?
So we're
Yeah.
taking it out.
Annoy
Taking
a
it out and
reasonable person, I mean, that's, yeah.
And repealing it from your code completely.
All righty.
That's what it sounds like you want to do.
Yes.
Okay. Now we go for the fun one. And this is actually pretty easy. Construction. You have two versions. You have one from the county, one from the state. And Matt, if you could put up that one chart that I created, that's not in the materials, but I gave it to council members a few days ago. And it compares what the county does to what the city does on times of the year, and also the hours that you can do construction noise and the type of construction work. So the county, you'll see, has concrete specifically. And then they go into, then the city does not. The other types of construction in residential zones and non-residential zones are noted. The city is more liberal when it comes to beginning times. Now, we got a letter from the home builders of Central Arizona, and they really would appreciate if you kept the 5 a.m. start time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look, I was here when the city provisions were amended at the request of Councilmember Durbala back in 2001, around that time. And I would say that our provisions are probably the ones you should use.
Yes.
If say someone wants, say that there's a big company and they're putting in sidewalks and it's July, they're gonna start at 2 in the morning probably, because it's so hot. So what they can do, they could get an exception from this. Or you can include a chart if you want, that's okay too, but we do have the language already. And they could get a special permit from the city manager's office. He could make it a lot easier so that they don't have to go to him and they could go to someone else at the Public Works Department and get a special permit for those times and dates for concrete or any other kind of noise that they think they're going to make. Also, what isn't really clear, do these times and these dates, do the decibel levels still apply during those times? that's up to you as a policy decision. I think that's gonna be difficult to enforce. So this should come under the exceptions.
Yes.
That's what I would recommend. And as to the times and the actual months. That's my recommendation. And I would recommend you use the city's provisions, not the county's.
I would like to see more consistency. To me, it doesn't make sense to differentiate with October or in April and the different times of the years. Noises are noises and they're going to bother people regardless of the time of year. So personally, I'd like to see more consistency. And I'm not a big fan of the 6:30. I say either make it 6 p.m. or 7 p.m.
I think that the early times in the summer are for the sake of those who are doing this kind of work, whereas they don't, and because it's daylight then, et cetera, at 5, and in the winter, 6 a.m. is a better time for them to get started. So I think that this is just simply giving a nod to understanding what they need to do and when they need to do it.
Exactly. It's right now. I mean, it's ridiculously hot and it's daylight at 5, so.
Well, so what we're saying is add the Pinal County concrete times to our charts. Is that correct?
Well, you can, but I think it's already covered unless you want to just have those so they don't have to get a special permit.
So Joel, an option is for them just to continue with our current, for this specific one, keep our current. Because I'll tell you, over the years, it's been a good code for me to have that flexibility
Sure.
to work with the private sector on this one. We've had probably, whether it's been the Fries or Four Peaks or different projects every other year where concrete just becomes an issue from certain time to certain time, and the flexibility in the
Set up
current.
too fast.
Right.
The only thing I was saying is why not just keep it at 5? I wouldn't say make it later, just keep it at 5. If they don't need to start at 5, they don't have to, but just seems to me it would be simpler.
I still have the different dates.
I agree,
I
yeah.
agree with the dates.
Yeah, I do too. And then we can just have the chart. We don't need to have it all written down in paragraph form, right?
Well, that's up to you. If you like the chart better, we can certainly
I like
just,
the chart better. It's far easier to read, and you can tell at a glance what you're doing. I'm doing residential construction. Oh golly, I can start at 5 because it's between April and October.
okay. I could put this in the exemption provision. We can use the chart and just use the city code chart. And I can just say construction noise or sound can be as follows.
Yay.
Something like that would work?
So as it stands right now, if we put the concrete work from Pinal County into Apache Junctions, they're not gonna have to apply for a special permit, but as of now, they do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we would want them to be able to throw that over to the other side, would we not?
What do you mean?
We would want that county's code into ours.
Why?
Why would we make them have to go through special permits?
Only if it's 2 a.m. So let's just make sure I understand clarification. Once a year, once every other year, we get a request to start like seriously early in the morning.
Well, that would be,
And that's the permit one that we've been able to flexible in our current ordinance that's very flexible. And I just want to make sure that flexibility is there if we
We-
do get to a very specific.
We actually had that complaint on Southern,
We did.
approximately Winchester and Rural Palm
Yep.
this year.
So what I'm hearing is you want to take the concrete work, Pinal County sections, move it over to the city chart, put it where it says NA, and then include that in the exemption section, correct?
Except on holidays, except make the times the same as the AJ times,
Okay.
okay? Because the holiday thing, work until 7, that's not cool.
I'd be curious on this decibel reading where backup horn is. Because whenever I think of construction, the first thing you always hear is the backup horns on the,
Beep, 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 beep.
yeah, I wonder where
The
that,
rollers.
Yeah, we didn't resolve that. Do we use decimal readers on that?
Okay.
And if we have these, then can they still be getting a permit if they need to, or wanting to do an earlier time, or still?
So
Well,
if it's
we need to
before
write-
5, if the permit's
That-
required.
Yeah, and that language was already in the code. I would suggest you keep the language of the city, but also have the chart. How would that work?
Okay.
That'll work.
Yeah.
That'll
Yeah.
work.
Well, I just want to make sure where it says concrete work, it's 5 AM to 7 PM, keep the dates. October 6th, same with the second part, 6 AM to 7 PM,
Noted.
or you want that changed, right?
I want that.
And what do you want it changed to?
I want it to go with the others, the city times,
Okay,
7
so 6 to
6:30.
6:30 instead of
And
7?
the weekends is 7 to 5.
Okay. Done. Well, that takes us now to page, we're on page, we're on page 11. We're almost done.
Yes.
Okay, section, it's number 9, and it says 10-1-12G. Actually, that one, I think, can go away because we're going to cover that under penalties. So that one, I think you should take out completely.
And what about 10-1-12F? You have a question mark there, too.
That's the permit part, and I think that should stay in.
Okay?
So now we go to,
Say that
E.
again, what, say that again,
it's the one right above that. It's on page 11, number 8.
yeah?
That's the permit part where someone could get a permit if they want to go beyond their times or go before the times.
All right.
So now we get into E with the question mark, small wireless facilities. You may recall that council passed this, I think, in 2017, and this was part of a state mandate regarding small wireless facilities. We don't have, I don't think we have any here yet in the city, but eventually we're going to. And they're going to be in your right-of-ways. So this was meant to deal with any noise that comes up from one of these structures that's like in the sidewalk or close to the sidewalk. So back then, it was a 65 decibel level. That's what you passed. So the decibel levels do apply, but they have specified what level here rather than in the chart. And so I think it could go into a section that says, Chapter 11 does not apply to the following unless otherwise specified. Does that work with you on the small wireless issues?
Definitely.
Okay?
Squealing fan.
Okay, and so that goes to, through
It goes to F.
F. Home-based occupation. This is another noise provision that is in our zoning code. Now remember, if you want to change the zoning code, you have to go back through P&Z. The question here is, do you want the decibel levels to apply to any kind of sound that comes as about for home-based occupations? And, you know, with the COVID, I think a lot more people are working at home. You might want to think about, you might start getting more complaints. The city manager is going to have to deal with that. So I don't know what you want to do with that. We could put that in the exemption section so that it reads as it reads. Shall not produce a noise.
But it does specify that it shall be conducted indoors.
It does. So in other words, for this, and Larry's not here, but Larry will tell you that the intent of this is we don't even want to know what's going on there, and we don't want to hear what's going on there or smell or feel what's going on. We don't want to know that you're doing a home-based occupation, even though we gave you a home-based occupation permit. That's basically what is on the books right now. So I would suggest that it go into that special exemption section, but so that you know when someone opens this up, if they have a home-based occupation, they're worried about noise, they know it is covered.
But those that are in the exemption section can still be cited for nuisances. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, because there is that far-off possibility that somebody's running a power saw in their garage or something else really big and really loud in their garage that a neighbor does complain about. So that would still go under the nuisance section, and it wouldn't matter that it was exempt.
well, if you're saying that you want the decibel levels to apply, you don't.
Not particularly, I
Okay.
was just bringing that
Then
up.
yes, then
That they
yes.
still could be, because your statement almost inferred that there would not be any way to cite if there was a noise complaint. And
No, there
there
is a
is
way.
actually a way to do that if it's valid.
Yes,
Yes.
you could use the disorderly conduct provision, unless the state legislature decides to make that, so you can't use that anymore, but that would still be available,
Yes.
okay?
So
Thank you.
just, I mean, you know, a fella who, or a person who is a woodworker and they've got a planer going, and those things are louder than a jet engine sometimes, most of the time. So if they're running it and somebody complains about it and this is exempted, they can still be cited for something.
Well, then the subjective
Right.
provisions come into play. So someone would, a police officer would have to be called.
Yeah.
Or a code officer, because you're not using the decibel, so it wouldn't
Right.
have to be police necessarily. But then if they hear it, then they would decide subjectively, hey, is this too loud? So it's, or you could use the neighbor to testify, like we have right now.
Well,
So-
and if the officer happened to have a decibel reader on him or her, he could state in his citation what the decibel reading was. It doesn't matter that we're not, and that would help back his case if there became a problem.
That there is an existence of a noise, yes. But the level itself is not a violation like it would be with
Right,
for other things
yeah.
in here. Okay, so that goes in exemptions. The next one is G, equestrian activities. This is also a zoning code provision, and it's related to noise. Social events and parties shall be subject to the same noise, parking, traffic, and health and safety regulations apply to other residential properties within the city. So, do you want the decibel chart to apply, or do you want that to be just like the one above it?
Just like the one above it.
Is that, okay, that'll be in the exceptions? Okay, is that, everybody's agree to that? Okay, then you get into airports and helipads. Well, we don't have an airport, but we do have a helipad. We almost had a helipad at a hospital back in 2002, I think it was. But you do have the helipads for the hospital, the current hospital. So this talks about a CUP, and also it talks about noise, vibration, glare. Do you want this one to also be in that exemption category? Is that a yes? I see heads shaking. Is that okay? Good, we can move on. Alternative energy structures, I would suggest you do the same with this one, if you don't have any objection to that.
Well,
Yeah.
the nice thing about this is we can always amend it.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, if we find that one of these things becomes a major problem, we can always amend our noise ordinance.
You can. Okay, the next one is general site development, and this does talk about associated facilities. Backup power generators shall comply with the setbacks in the zoning district and the city's noise standards. So right now, the noise standards are based on the subjective. So do you want them to be, the decibel chart to apply, or do you want to leave that alone and put that in exceptions also?
Well, site development is under construction.
What'd you say, Gail?
Well, site development is really, is just part of construction.
Where do you see site? Oh, there, I see you.
So,
I mean,
so then it could go into the exceptions.
Right.
Hmm. But if it's actually construction, it should go in with the construction.
right.
Well, then I think whoever is using a citation or a long-form complaint would cite under the construction. And they probably wouldn't even rely on this, but this is some provision that's been in there for a while. It's an old code provision. Remember, it's also a zoning code provision, so,
So in actuality, you have two things going here. If you have an officer called out and it does happen to be a site that's being developed, then he, if he wishes to cite, would use the decibel under the construction part of this.
remember, decibels are not going to apply to this construction noise. And you're gonna have a chart that controls the times that they can do
Ah,
the
gotcha.
activities.
Gotcha.
So it would be according to the times and the date, the time periods during the year.
Right.
So what you're saying is we can either leave it there, we can exempt it, because we don't want to delete it altogether, because then we'd have to go to P and Z on that one,
Yes,
if we deleted it,
yes, if you repeal it, it has to go to P and Z
P and
first.
Z, but otherwise, we can either put it in exempt or leave it as is.
I would recommend you do the exemption,
I understand.
Yep.
because the construction noise covers it.
Agreed.
Is that good? Okay.
Next.
Temp,
That's, the next one is subjective.
temporary uses. Yeah, no unreasonable noise there, with the unreasonable, that's a subjective standard. Impact public or private disturbances or nuisances shall occur or be performed to continue as determined by the zoning administrator. So temporary uses, that could be anything that is allowed by administrative use permit as a temporary use. And so I think you should put that in exemptions also.
When would we have a temporary use structure for noise?
Or if someone has a wedding or
You might allow a temporary use, kind of like, and a lot of things council doesn't do anymore. Council doesn't do I think you created an administrative use permit that now allows staff to do certain types of temporary uses, usually associated with the property, and maybe there's a construction trailer that is on the property.
Right.
We get back to construction most of the time on these, but I think that's the type of use.
I've had some thoughts coming in my head about, is there any chance that the city itself violates any of these? Or all of our events are over by 10 o'clock?
and we're.
That's a Brian
did. We ran this by Liz, and I think that we triple-checked everything through her, and the answer to those questions are yes. Correct, Matt? I don't think we had any issues
Right.
on any of this. Liz really looked this over.
Right.
Do you remember any? Okay, yeah, we're good.
Okay.
But it's a great question. We had the same questions, yeah.
So can I put that under exemptions? Okay. Now we get to the standard conditional use permit. This is also a subjective standard. And conditional use permits are done by the planning and zoning. They're issued by the Planning and Zoning Commission right now. The only way you see conditional use permits is when someone appeals it to you. So they have to go through a checklist for certain things that are being asked for. And it cannot be a use that is, or a structure that will be detrimental to persons residing or working in the area, to adjacent property, or to the neighborhood, or to the public welfare in general. And then they go on to say the proof for satisfying the requirements shall rest with the applicant. In arriving at the above determination, the council, that should probably say
Z.
P and Z, but once again, if you want to amend that, technically you have to go back to the P and Z even for one word.
We'll let P and Z do that.
Okay, so.
They
and
can decide if they want to amend.
They can decide that, yes. And then it talks about noise at the end. So I suggest that this also be under exemptions. Listed, but under exemptions. Do you all agree to that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, now we get to a juicy one. This one is fun. This is investigations. Now, what I did was, Mr. Schroeder had some statutes or some code provisions from different cities. And I received some feedback from staff on this one. So we attempted something that would really explain how a violation would be handled. I'm not going to go and read all of it, but I will say we make the difference between objective and subjective standard. We also talk about it's a police officer who's going to be doing the decibel readings. And also that we do need to change this language where it talks about from where the measurement's taken, and we can do that. That would be from the 20 feet within the property, the structure footprints, so we can change that.
Blank, yeah.
Also that they are subject to the decibel levels in the chart, and that there will be one warning. And Councilmember Rizzi, this is a section that talks about that. It's under A1. There will be basically a warning that will be documented, so that, meaning there's either a police report or a CAD report that shows that the person was warned that the decibel level is higher than it's allowed to be.
And so there won't be a time frame. So like if I get one warning and 5 years later I get another, and 5 years later it won't be a warning, it'll be a citation. There won't be like a time frame, like say, one warning within a certain time frame before it becomes another warning, or just no matter how long the time goes on from the first warning, any second issue is going to be a citation.
I think that comes in on number 3, council member, where it says no warnings will be provided for subsequent violations. If we added within X amount of time, that would take care of your concern, I think.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to put in a certain amount of time because, within a couple months, I can understand that obviously there's a continued problem. But if we're talking about a year, 2 years, or 3 years down the road, and it becomes I think we need to put in a time frame.
60 days.
I think that's reasonable.
You want 60 days?
I'm thinking 60 days.
How can I just to go the other route, how frequent of a warning or how frequent of a complaint? I mean, we don't, hopefully it never comes down to make a complaint and 15 minutes later make another complaint. But that's another, how do we handle that one?
Well, that's a policy decision. First of all, if you want to do the 60 days, that's fine. And you could do it within, well, it'd be the same person too. If the ownership of the establishment changed or whoever's making, that would be also different.
Yeah, you cite the person, not the property.
Right.
When it says, on number 3, when it says no warnings will be provided for subsequent violations, this is after this initial violation got its warning and then got a citation and then moved through the system, correct?
Yes, and we could add that in after the
Okay.
initial warning is provided.
Okay.
And then I'll add the time in there also.
What if the police officer would choose to give a warning, which they do on traffic stops all the time? They don't have to cite.
You mean for the second time that they get a
Yes.
call to that is up to the officer, but you can take that discretion away if you want, but if you don't, if you want to give them the discretion, give them the discretion.
Yeah, I would hope that since our command staff is here, that there would be some discretion.
Okay, I'll add some discretion language to that provision on the warnings.
And also on number 2, in the second line, a citation shall be issued to a property owner or manager. Not may, because may leaves it open so that they might not get anything.
So you want it changed, okay, citation shall. That's after the warnings, obviously.
Right, it's after,
And after the officers use their discretion in providing other warnings, correct? Okay.
Joel, do we need that, or should we, I guess to everybody, besides the police department, add in here about whether the code compliance people could issue with the decibel reader or someone designated by the city manager?
Well,
Or does it have to be just the police department?
it doesn't have to be. You may, other cities do have code. Some cities have a full squad of decibel people, but it's up to you on how you want to handle this. Administratively, I'm going to leave that to Bryant, because he's the one that would,
It might not be a bad idea to have a comma or a delegate of the city manager. Just, we never know how the organization's gonna change over time.
Well, some cities have, you know, civilian patrols that could be trained in them.
Yeah.
now, code compliance, they don't work at night. So if you get a complaint on someone drumming from a house, we've had that, Mr. Yuva, haven't we? Yes. Yes, so what do you do with that? A code officer is not gonna be working, so it'll be a police officer. Who's ever available is, I think, what you're talking about, correct?
Right.
So you want, okay, so it doesn't have to be the police department, it could be.
I'm not a fan of that.
I,
I'm not a fan of that. We already are talking about having our code compliance officers overwhelmed, and now we're gonna task them with, I'm not a fan of that. I think it should be a law enforcement person that handles the decibel readings.
I would not have a problem with the aspect of that the city manager, or at the city manager's, direction.
I agree.
That way, if it was a problem that we were dealing with that was happening on a regular basis at a certain time, we could have someone that was actually there during that period of time,
during the day?
during the day or during the night.
Well, usually the police are available, but if they're tied up, to have a code compliance officer available, why not have the availability of someone else?
So you're gonna have possible code enforcement personnel go confront possible rowdy folks, throw a ticket in their face? I don't see that going
I
well.
don't think anybody throws a ticket in anybody's face, but compliance people have to, they come up against irate people all the time.
And a lot of times they
It's
have to
part of
have,
their job.
I'm sorry I'm interrupted, but we also send police officers with code enforcement for those
Sometimes.
hairy situations.
I'm not comfortable
Yeah.
putting code compliance in the middle of this mix. Not at all. I'm not comfortable with that at all.
I think if it gets written in, we're just gonna spend lots and lots of time taking it out later when it
Yeah.
comes up. So
Part
if
of,
you wanna give yourself a bunch of extra work, put it in there, but it's
No,
not gonna
Not
fly.
a windmill worth tilting at.
And part of the reason I think going with the decibel meters is to provide this objective measurement, right? So it really doesn't matter about the user. It doesn't really matter about discretion of warnings. There's a measurement now. If it's above a certain measurement, it's a violation, right? And so I only offer that up because I think that's what the goal of all this is to have an objective, non-human instrument that says this is more than 65 decibels.
No, Mr. Mayor,
And-
if I could, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Were you done? Okay. If you leave it in now and see how this goes after this passes, and see what the burden is on the police department, and then maybe bring it back if there is a problem.
Yeah.
Do you want to do that? Or do you want to,
If there's a problem with what?
if there's a problem with just having the police department do it?
Just doing police,
If they're
We can always add in the code compliance.
You could amend it later.
yes.
Yeah,
We
I
can
think
always-
that's a better option.
We can always bring it back. I mean, our full intent is to have law enforcement. I know I feel more comfortable starting out with just law enforcement. I was talking in long-term flexibility, we can bring it back.
So I think we're on the same
Can I
page
ask
then?
another, so just process-wise, let's say somebody calls up and there's a complaint of noise, and it's at 7 o'clock on a Friday night. What is the process that the police would put this in place so that when it comes again on Saturday night at 7 o'clock, that the officer that wasn't working Friday night would know that there's gonna be that there was already a warning on Friday night that they have to cite them on Saturday night. What's the?
They have records.
No, but police, I'm asking the
They can-
police officer, I'm asking chief or
I think
Commander Freeman.
Commander Freeman can answer that.
Mayor, council members. We look back historically at CAD, and typically if we have a call that becomes a problem property, the officer will ask when the last time it was we were out there.
Okay.
We do it with citizen contacts where we have a repeat offender. We'll ask when was the last time we had contact. Dispatch can go through the CAD, the computer-aided dispatch module, and look and see when our last contact was.
Okay.
So are we done with that issue? Yes.
Did we decide to take code compliance out and then we add them if it becomes a problem in the future?
Code compliance isn't in there now, so you're gonna leave it as is.
Oh, wait, okay, not putting them in unless
Yeah.
it becomes an issue with
You need
the
to
police
amend it.
department.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, going to top of 14. This was an addition also. It talks about anonymous complaints will not be accepted or acted upon. The complaining party must leave a name, address, and phone number in order for the police department to investigate further. So that was a request of a council member.
I'm going to make a comment on this one. I really don't think this is even, I'm going to say, needed to be there, because number one, for us to go out and do to file a record on this, we're going to have to go to the complainant's property and actually physically be there and record the decibel reading. And if they're not going to give us an address or anything, there's no reason for us to go out, because there's nowhere to go to, and to measure within 25 feet of the structure to make this, I'll say, investigation.
If I could just say one thing, and if I could have Matt put up resolution number 8841. And Bryant might have something to say on this, because this has been a policy that we've had, actually, it's been a resolution since 1988. Do you want to speak to that, Bryant?
It's just been our guiding customer service document since 1988 for staff to accept anonymous complaints.
Number 3, second paragraph, is where it starts to talk about anonymous. So if the complainant wishes to remain anonymous, he or she should be advised the complaint will be processed on the basis of the information given. The complainant should be advised that, well, I'm not going to read all this, but basically it talks about what you do with an anonymous complaint. And it's similar to what Mr. Wilson just said. You've got to have, if you're going to go there, and if they don't give out the information, then, and you can't go there because you don't know where it is, that's a problem. But I think there was an issue I think that the concern was there's going to be harassment toward a certain sound emitter. And I think that was the issue. And how does the city stop that from happening?
Joel, can I interrupt real quick? Councilmember Rizzi got disconnected. If I can dial her back in.
Time out.
Are you there, Councilmember Rizzi? Sound like she picked up.
Why don't you try again? Yeah,
Ask her again. She's just texting me right now. Councilmember Rizzi?
No, I hung up.
Okay.
Can you hear us, Councilmember Rizzi?
I'm in.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think there's another point too on this. Police really can't pick and choose what calls they decide to take. I mean, it seems to me that's kind of against the whole idea of police. Most of their calls, I would say, I don't want to say all, but most of them are based on a call from somebody, somewhere. Be it an automobile accident, be it noise, be it a burglary or what have you. I mean, they're all calls. So, seems to me this would be pretty much against everything they stand for.
I remember being on planning and zoning with Councilmember Rizzi when this was an issue. And we had people that were so afraid of retaliation from a neighbor if they made a phone call. So how do we still protect those people?
I would disagree with this particular thing.
Could
Well,
have the-
I don't, as far as protecting people, that information is retracted. There's no way that a person would get, if they were to do a records request, as of right now, that information is already redacted. It's not, so how would anybody possibly have information to retaliate unless they know it's the neighbor that's calling anyway? So they're going to know that they would, as far as retaliation goes, they would know that anyway. The problem is we have people that are using it for harassment, and they're using it because there's not a requirement to provide that information. We just take the call, and yes, the police department generally has a caller's information, but it's not actually documented. And there may be a time it's not documented necessarily in a report, just a call that was made. But with retaliation, that's just obsolete because that information is never given in a public records request anyway.
I still disagree with it.
But again, it is for us to go out on this noise, we have to have an address to go to be able to make the measurements in the investigation.
The way it's set up, yeah.
And so therefore, that's, like I said, to me, the not accepting them is irrelevant. Is if they're not going to give us an address, we've got nowhere to go and nowhere to do the investigation.
I agree, Chip.
Could the commander or the chief make a statement on this?
Sure.
On how, in practice, how anonymous calls are handled?
Council member, or mayor, council members, typically in an anonymous complaint, what we would try to do is go out and where the location is at, we'd go ahead and take a reading, put it in the CAD, and give a warning, and dispatch would probably try to coax the caller into giving their name and the address. We would explain to them we need a location. If they gave us a general location, then we would go to that general location and take the reading there, put it in the CAD, and if it was above the decibel level, we'd go, give a warning to where the source was.
But we already put it in there, but we talked about putting it in 20 or 25 feet from the foundation of the complainant's property or home or dwelling, or whatever you want to call it. So if you don't have
The name.
that to go measure the decibels from,
What we'd do in that particular instance is we would give additional footage, and typically if we can actually get the homeowner or the person calling,
right.
if we show them the decibel reading, sometimes that will end the complaint there because they find out it's not as loud as they thought it was.
But that would be if you knew who the
Correct.
complainant was.
Correct, and we would explain to them on the phone that we're going to come out and we're going to take a decibel reading, so we need your location.
Right.
And dispatch would try to get that information. If they still refuse to give it to us, we would go to at least the area and take several readings around it, put it in the CAD, and then we'd go about our business.
Captain, could you explain CAD to the people watching online?
Yes, sir. CAD is computer-aided dispatch, and what it does is when someone calls in, if they call in on 911, it gives their location. If it's a cellular phone, it will triangulate that location to within 10, 15 feet, hopefully.
Mr. Mayor, if I could ask one question. However, if they block the call, if they have it from their side, they're blocking it, does it show up at PD, what number and what address?
Yeah, I don't believe you can block a 911 call. I believe that information is going to be displayed anyway.
But you wouldn't ignore an anonymous call.
We don't ignore anonymous calls.
Okay.
We just don't, as a practice. We're here for customer service and to answer calls for service.
Well, now, this isn't across-the-board anonymous calls, though. This is noise complaint calls.
Yes.
So if someone said, hey, someone's breaking into a house, that's not something you're going to ignore, an anonymous call. Now, I don't agree with the idea of someone saying, I'm not comfortable giving you my name, I'm not going to give you my address, so here's the general vicinity, go ahead and take a reading, and then if it encroaches your decibel meters, give the warning. That just doesn't sound right. It's based on disturbing the peace and quiet of somebody's property, right? I mean, that's what the whole thing's all about.
Yes, sir.
So in order to be able to enforce that, we need to know where their property is at.
Yes, sir.
Because if you're at the Village Inn taking if someone says, oh, the handlebar, and then they got a band playing, but we live over by the Village Inn. So you're on the Village Inn taking a reading, but where are they? I mean, are they behind the other side? Are they in the neighborhood behind where the Ace Hardware is at? We don't know. But the whole point behind this whole thing is disturbing the peace and quiet and slumber of someone's residential dwelling.
Yes, sir.
But what he just said, if I heard you correctly, was that if you had no location of the complainant, you might take several readings, but you wouldn't be issuing a warning or anything because you have no reason
Well, no, he
to.
did say you would issue a warning.
No,
though.
he
No,
said
we
you
wouldn't. If it, you're correct, Councilmember Barker.
I thought you said that we would take surrounding areas and we'd go in and issue a warning. Did I misunderstand that?
I'm sorry.
I thought that's what I heard you say.
Okay.
So if you had an anonymous call with no location, you would take a general vicinity area of the decibel readings, but you wouldn't act on it.
Correct, for documentation only. As a general rule, police officers like to have witnesses.
Sure.
So we're going to do our very best to search out the person that actually initiated this complaint. Because for obvious reasons, it's not bothering us. So there needs to be, it needs to be bothering someone. So we would like to search out that person and encourage them to come forward. Because in many ways, we can settle the problem by showing them the decibel reading. And it also can work in the business's favor, just like it can work against the business. If the decibel reading doesn't reach that level, then the citizen's going to understand that, it doesn't reach that level, so. And typically, that will end the complaint process.
Okay.
Okay, so this number 4 can be totally eliminated.
Yes.
Is that
My
the
apologies for the
consensus?
confusion.
Is that the consensus?
I think
Okay.
so.
It shall be.
Kristen?
Next, this one is, I believe, to deter false calls. It shall be unlawful for any person to misrepresent or give any false or inaccurate information or in any way attempt to deceive a city staff member in order to avoid compliance with the provisions of this chapter. This is a standard one I've seen in other codes.
I like it,
So that one stays.
I mean, that's a general policy with anything, isn't it?
Yeah.
If somebody calls up complaints and
Yep.
there's
definitely.
false statements or whatever, that's already in there, so.
Now, as for the next one. that-
But if they're making false statements and we don't have their information, then what's the recourse?
Well, if you don't have their information, that's a problem. I agree with you.
So we're back to the anonymous calling. Somebody could make a false,
Yeah, but there's no warning
Claim.
based on anonymous calls. The police don't make warnings on a business or a individual based on an anonymous call that they don't have somebody to provide the information or to make the decibel reading from the complainant's home or dwelling or whatever, so.
well, and that may be the case. It may not be that anybody receives a warning or a citation, but that's not to say that there's still no harm being done. They're still making the false complaint, and so, I mean, why encourage it?
So I have a question, going back on this. So, Officer, you were saying that, it's okay, you're not gonna serve a warning, but it'll be put on record.
It would be put in the CAD, just in case we have to go back the following night or the next night.
Right, now, is that not how people can build cases against individuals or business to prosecute, so long as they have a record of this happening? Even no warning was given or no citation was given, but so long as there's a pattern of a record, is that now how a case is put together against somebody?
I could answer, as to decibel readers, no, because it's gonna be based on the decibel violation. And if it's not
But
based,
if it happens to be in violation of the decibel reading, but they're at a location where there's not a resident, I mean, you could be anywhere. So I guess what I'm asking is, so this is a back door to not have to give the name, not have to give the address, put the officer in a surrounding area somewhere, regardless of whether or not it meets the decibel level, it goes on record of being a complaint against a situation, even though nothing was done. But that is how a case is built against somebody, am I correct?
well, that evidence that you're talking
But
about.
is that correct?
Would be, well, not exactly. And I could have the prosecutor tell you what it is like in court. But if you have that kind of evidence, and that's all you've got, that case is gonna be dismissed, in my opinion.
Because you have a decibel reader mandate within the noise code.
Correct.
But what I'm
Thank you.
saying is that if they're at a location and it happens to exceed the decibel level, even though there's no one to, there's not a victim per se, because where they're at, there's no victim, but it happens to exceed the decibel level because where they're at may not be the same decibel level as where the person who is calling is at.
Well, then it's a violation. Then it is an actual violation.
Of
Of the,
From who?
it doesn't matter, it's a violation of the code. The decibel level has been exceeded.
But where are you taking the measurement from? From what footprint, 20 feet in or 25 feet in, are you taking that measurement from?
If you don't have that information, then the case doesn't even ever get filed. You have to have that, that's a prerequisite.
But
That's
it does get put on record that it happened.
But it's irrelevant. A judge would say, I don't care about that because you didn't measure it, or you didn't have it from a certain location. That's what would happen, because the code has to be followed for that element.
Okay.
So number 5 becomes irrelevant without number 4. There's no point in saying that it's unlawful to misrepresent or give false information if we're not going to require a person's contact information given. So if we're going to take out number 4, there's also no point in having number 5. It's unenforceable. Number 5 is unenforceable without number 4.
Well, unless other information comes about
Yes.
where someone has reported, hey, I know so-and-so, and they have made false allegations, and then the police department can investigate that. So it's up to you if you want to keep it in. It's a policy decision.
It just seems that the two would go together.
So this is only pertaining to this noise ordinance.
Right.
Correct.
Other incidents across the city, this would still apply.
Yes.
I mean,
that-
if
there
you've
are-
got a bid or a divorce
Yeah.
and someone's calling all the time, then.
Right.
It's called harassment,
Yeah,
yes,
so-
and that
so
is in the
doesn't-
statutes.
Yeah, so we're not changing anything other than.
No.
Right here.
Okay.
So take it out, leave it in.
Leave 5.
What are we
Leave it in.
talking about?
Number 5,
Okay.
Leave it
sorry.
Leave it in.
Leave it in, it's a good thing.
Leave
But
it,
how do you enforce it if people are, how do you know if somebody's doing that if we're not going to require that they leave their, give their contact information?
Even if they did have, where they've been out there and are doing an investigation, and they have an address and everything, and they're giving false information, that could be used in that time frame.
and false information, Mr. Yuva reminded me, is covered in other places in statute and code, so. Do you want to have this as an addition? Just,
So is it not, and it's not, you're saying it's not needed because it's elsewhere?
correct.
Then let's delete it and
Okay.
forget it.
Okay. Goodbye, Sedona. Okay. Okay. As to A on the next section, I think that's already covered from the staff rendition.
it's
And I suggest we
subjective.
take that out completely.
It's also subjective.
Yes. And then as to the other sections, those are general ones that can stay in.
Yeah, but B, I don't like the idea of commanding anybody. I mean, command. Just seems to me if you want to keep it in there, it's just simple to say it's unlawful for any person to fail to comply, rather than the commanding attitude.
Okay, so take out the first sentence.
Yeah,
Done.
thank you.
How about the C? C is also general language that I've seen elsewhere, and I don't necessarily think you need it here, but if you want it as extra protection, you can have it in there. It's unlawful for any person to hinder, obstruct, delay, resist, prevent in any way, interfere or attempt to interfere with any authorized person while performing the
Yeah, that's a
basic.
general thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and we do have that covered also in
I was gonna
other
say, don't
code
we have it
provisions.
covered elsewhere?
Yeah.
I believe it is.
Okay, take it out.
Take it out? All right,
That's Sedona again?
Yeah,
that is Sedona.
yeah, but we had it before they did evidently.
They just approved their code, actually, and it was, I think, 15 pages long. Okay, exemptions. Just to remind you, we're going to add some of the sections that we talked about earlier into
Vehicular
exemptions.
It just got a lot
noise.
longer.
It did, but we're going to reference it, we're not going to spell it out. We're just going to reference the code provision. That's what I understand you want to do.
Yes.
So let's go to number 3, which everything was good up till the underlined. I don't know, that's when it got a little confusing. So what would be exempt would be non-amplified crowd noises resulting from activities such as athletic, musical, or cultural activities or events planned by schools, government, or community groups, or organized sports. Then there's a comma, and then it says, except for such noises generated at restaurants, bars, inns, or resorts of any kind.
And they're already covered by the
I believe they are.
decibel thing.
So this was a county provision, so can I take out that
Take out
last
that
clause?
whole section.
Yeah, and I'm
Whole
kind of
section or that
curious,
clause?
I'm
That
kind of,
clause.
Okay,
I'm kind of curious about the community group and organized sports. It seems to me like organized sports, things like Little League and that kind of thing is what you're referring to, right?
this was the county provision. I don't remember, let's see if they have it. I don't think there's a definition on it, so.
That's what I would think, softball
Yeah,
leagues,
that's
you
what
know,
I think
anything that has a crowd.
And community
Observing.
groups, like what? Give me some thoughts on that.
So if we had an open mic night out at the, someplace at Horizon Health or something like that, and we.
So does that mean that the hours don't apply to you?
I'm just throwing
Yeah,
out a community
yeah.
that would have,
That was my question,
Crowd noises.
did you like that, Braden?
because that would also apply to Chamber of Commerce, if they had an event, or just about anybody. So does this exempt them from the hours? Does it exempt them from the noise?
From
What is-
everything.
Oh, well,
So you
I
want,
would take community groups out of there.
we can do that?
That's too wide open.
Okay. Anybody else on that one?
So I have a question on cultural activities. Would that be horse riding?
There's no definition, so you could create one if you want, but I don't know what the county,
I mean, it's a culture, right? I mean, that's what basically it's
Sure.
saying.
Sure, so you'd have to put that in
So
the definitions.
The cowboy way, so to speak,
So does that apply to rodeos?
it may. That's cultural.
And that's noise so they wouldn't have to fit into the noise thing unless it was,
Well, it says non-amplified crowd noises.
yes, it does,
Sure, so like
not amplified crowd
cheering,
noise.
right? Or clapping.
Okay, they can cheer and clap.
So if
You
we,
can have fun today.
if we take control of the rodeo ground someday and we have concerts, they will be amplified.
That's
So-
governmental.
Government.
That's governmental,
Yeah.
We better.
we got a way out of that one.
So can a community group, if they do a cultural event, would that still get them back in there?
And it's organized sports?
With the permit, I don't see why not.
Yeah, that's a permitted situation.
There's interpretation issues here, so I don't know what you want to do with this one.
Yeah, I know, there's a lot of
Take out community groups and delete except for to the end.
The whole phrase?
Yep.
The whole phrase, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else?
Krista?
I'm good.
Okay, let's move on. Page 15. There's some more general exceptions here that unless you don't have issues with, I'm not going to repeat them. But I did put question marks next to number 12, Sedona. Sedona didn't have both of those. I think Sedona had one of those and another city had one of the ones. I forget which. The question here, I think Mr. Wilson had an issue with the time
I do too.
because it stops at 11 for fireworks on Independence Day and New Year's.
Well,
Well,
people-
midnight is
Yeah,
still.
New Year's, 12 o'clock, right? They're out
So,
there at
yeah.
12. That has to be
What time
loaded.
do you want to, or do you even want to have a time?
How about 1?
So those are both holidays.
Yeah.
You know, don't we have something in here about holidays? Oh, that
That
was.
was
That's for construction.
That was
Construction.
Yeah.
construction, yeah. Yeah, I'd like to see it at 1. That gives people the opportunity to clang their pans and do all the stuff they do at midnight on New Year's Eve and,
Joel, is fireworks not addressed anywhere else in the city code? Don't we have some firework?
Well, the
Regulations.
the legislature changed the rules a number of years ago.
Yeah.
So anything we have in our code is not enforceable. And so I think the state code under Title 36 it sets forth the dates and the times.
Right,
Does it
it's
set
a
like the
time?
day of and the day after. or
I
something like
think
that.
I thought it was just days.
it might be days, I'd have to,
Probably doesn't say time.
I don't know for
Probably
sure.
right.
I can't tell you for
I
sure.
thought it was just days, like the day before and the day after. I don't
It might
remember
be
any
days.
times being set.
So I don't know, I'll check.
Yeah,
But
if this is out of compliance with that, then we'll just have to get rid of it.
Well, then you can't even enforce it, that's the
Right.
problem. Yeah.
Just have to get rid of it then.
The big issue on fireworks is not, it's the illegal versus legal.
yeah.
Legal, if everyone just legal fireworks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
these are legal
It'd be-
fireworks.
Yeah.
So the ground level ones, not the
Right.
ones that go in the air, those are illegal. So maybe it doesn't really matter.
And what matters are illegal fireworks in our city. on
But
this
yes,
issue.
but we can't, that's
Right,
a
right, right,
statutory
right,
thing.
right. We get a lot of calls.
So do you want to leave this exception in and just take out the time? Okay. And then we get to number 13. And I went further to look at the history on this one. And I think Mr. Schroeder had some original language from Mesa. So that language is activities including commercial activity which is permitted under the zoning code. And then there was a period, and I think added was conditional use permit or development agreement.
I
So
don't agree.
that's one up for discussion.
I don't agree with this at all. Number 1, conditional use permits normally have a section that says that the signer of that permit is going to adhere to the current zoning code, which would include this, and development agreements, it's usually in the miscellaneous section that they will comply with it. So I just simply don't agree with this. I think these people who have commercial activity need to comply with the times and the noise levels.
Well, generally, like under a development agreement, there are times in a development agreement, are there not, that they have to comply to?
But
Anyways,
it says that they'll comply to the zoning code, which is the noise levels and
well,
the,
here's what gets me. So a guy in his garage with a wood planer that is literally a normal conversation, hello, how are you, to your neighbor is exempt because he has a don't ask, don't tell business in his house. But yet, a businessman that has an operation that is allowed to do things per the city through agreements is not exempt?
well, I'd be more than happy to change the home business. I'd be happy to do it and make them comply with the decibel levels also. That would not bother me in the least.
Well, and I asked Rudy if we had any holders of CUPs or development agreements, if there's any mention of using outdoor amplification, that kind of loud noise, and there's not. It doesn't exist. We don't have anybody that falls under this. So if we're gonna exempt all commercial activities, why do we even have commercial under the decibel section?
I agree.
It conflicts each other.
I agree.
I mean, they have to,
Well, no, because you have
sure.
like a live band who plays in a commercial place isn't necessarily an activity. A cornhole tournament or a volleyball tournament, those are activities that are being held that is not normal bar atmosphere stuff. There are people that congregate in parking lots that get rowdy and they get crazy. That's not activity, but that is something on the premises of the bar that could exceed decibel level readings. Now, I understand, like, so conditional use permit, that's something, Joel, you said we have to go back to the planning and zoning to fix that. Is that correct?
If you want to amend that section, yes.
So, but in order to have a conditional use permit clause in here, it would have to go to planning and zoning first.
Yes, and usually planning and zoning doesn't set decibel levels, they just say
So if
the
you were to,
uses.
so if we were to just take out the conditional use permit,
No.
No.
No,
I
because you're still
disagree.
exempting all
why
commercial
would you give a
activities.
business a development agreement if they're not allowed to
It's
do the
an
things that's under the agreement?
economic- It's an economic development agreement. In the case of the one I believe you're thinking of, it was so that the city would pay the fees rather than the
Are there not
applicant.
conditions in the economic development?
Yes, that they will follow the city noise ordinance. It is right in there.
And at
if
the
I-
time, what noise ordinance
have
was
it.
that?
But there was also nothing in the development agreement or the 3 amendments thereof giving permission for the use of a loudspeaker or bleachers. So if we want to
Bleachers?
exempt commercial,
Did you want your question
Businesses.
answered that you just asked about at the time? What was the,
Yes.
Joel?
I think the way it read was, the developer shall comply with all city ordinances. So whatever noise ordinance was in effect at the time. It doesn't limit it to decibels, because there was no decibel rule at the time.
And which ordinance was in effect at the time?
The one that we have now.
Yeah, the 10-1-12 is the music one, which we've talked about already. That's not a zoning code, that's the regular city code.
and the nuisance.
And then there's other ones also, and the nuisance, the general nuisance.
And if you exempt this, we are right back to where you started, where we have complaints that are subjectively measured, and we're right back to the very reason why we did this in the first place. And I don't want to go back there. Otherwise, we've wasted 3 hours or 2 hours of our time up here going through a noise ordinance
No, but this
that is not
ordinance
for
goes
the
deeper
purpose.
than a
Excuse
business.
me?
It goes deeper than a business. We talk about cars, we talk about
Right,
dogs.
but we didn't change them.
We talked about, we actually took the vehicles out.
No,
No, they're still in there.
Well, we exempted them.
we exempted them because they were. But I truly believe that if this remains in here, that one of the major reasons why we did this has just gone down the tubes.
Absolutely.
I don't see how that is. I just don't see where the city can set up a business to do business just to tear it down.
We're not tearing
Tearing
down a
anything
business, we're
down.
saying that you can't have your noise to the point that 20 feet away from the footprint of somebody's residence, their windows are shaking. That's what we're saying.
I don't think that's ever been a situation.
Well, I just grabbed something
Sure.
like you have.
Sure.
So, you
I'm not
know,
grabbing
what the heck?
I'm not grabbing something. I mean, it's
Come on,
legit,
Schroeder.
it's legitimate. It's kind of like if, what's the difference between the city allowing Republic Services to put on a fireworks show, and then have them exempt from people calling up and saying, oh, no, the fireworks are too loud. Well, the city let them do it.
It's a governmental exercise, which is in here, which you just approved.
I thought the government was for the people, by the people.
So do you want on the chart with the decibels, the entire commercial section removed? And this is only going to apply to residential and industrial, because that's what you're saying.
So I guess what I really need to say right now is that, am I the only one up here that feels like this should stay in? Because if I am, we might as well move on because it's gonna pass without it.
Krista?
Which part, Robert? I'm trying to listen
13,
and
13.
follow, but
13.
Page 15, number 13.
I need to hear from a few others.
I don't know what else to say.
I'm kind of tied.
This negates the whole commercial section.
Yeah, it takes all commercial activity out of the hours and the decibels.
And that's
Just
why we're
remove
here.
them.
But you're
Boom,
suggesting that
gone.
every commercial business is under economic development agreement.
No.
No, you have here, activities, including commercial activity, comma, which is permitted under the zoning code. All commercial activity is permitted under the zoning code.
Okay, well then
It
take out
is
zoning code and
permitted.
conditional use permit.
No, I still can't go for it. I think
No.
it's wrong.
Well, then that would bring me back. You're suggesting that all commercial are under development agreement.
No, I'm just saying, I think that's wrong. I don't think there should be an exemption because they
For
have a
commercial
conditional
activity.
use permit or a development agreement. I don't think that
So
should be
like I said,
classified as
I'd
an
be willing to
exemption.
go take away the conditional use permit.
No.
And the
It-
development agreement.
Your Honor,
I
Yes.
would not vote for either.
Joe, can we get some, it's getting a little hard to follow. Can we get clarification what happens if this is left in? What happens if this is taken out?
Well, okay, Krista, it'd be an exemption from this chapter. So the decibel chart wouldn't apply to activities, including commercial activity, which is permitted under the zoning code, conditional use permit, or development agreement.
Would it also mean that the hours wouldn't apply?
It would mean that none of
none
the
of-
provisions of
None
this
of it would
chapter
apply.
would apply to anything that I just
Any-
read.
But
Commercial
whatever is under the
activity.
development agreement would apply.
Yes,
So either way, so we've gone through a bunch of things saying, well, it's in here, so we really
But-
don't need it in here.
well, it depends what you're talking about. There might be hours listed in a development agreement. I know of one development agreement, and there's no decibel readings mentioned in that development agreement, but there are hours. You are correct about that.
So I'm just saying, the way this is right now, it excludes all commercial activity.
That's how it was.
For any time, at any decibel, they're excluded. They can do whatever willy-nilly thing they want to do.
I disagree with that. They still have a development agreement they got to adhere to.
Yes.
Or a conditional use permit, wouldn't,
Only
That-
if the noise is added into that, and this is what we're changing.
So
So
for
it's,
activities including commercial activity which is permitted under the zoning code, everybody agree with that?
Not that it should be excluded, no.
If it's permitted under the code, why shouldn't it be excluded?
Yes.
We permit,
that's right, that's what we're saying.
right, we're
to
talking about the
exempt it.
zoning code, commercial,
So
industrial.
again, activities including
residential.
commercial activity which is permitted under the zoning code. You're fine with that sentence in that?
Not excluding
No,
it.
we're not excluding it. That's what this whole section is exemptions. Why would we exempt a commercial business? If we're gonna do that, then let's take the commercial section out of the whole chart, because that's what you're saying.
This is the county, though. This is in yellow, and so this is a suggestion that this isn't even a city code. This is county.
No,
Absolutely.
if I
We're
may,
saying it should be
actually,
deleted.
I said this when I first started.
This particular one.
That one should have been green because it came from Mesa. It was not county. And then Mr. Schroeder added in the last phrases. So,
But why would we exclude commercial activity? This is,
It's ludicrous.
I mean, we're just going to charge residential and industrial people with decibel readings and forget
Nobody
about
else.
commercial. That's what that says if we exclude this.
well, Mr. Mayor, we have some more pages. I don't know if you want to move on. 'cause
Chip,
I-
do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I have to agree that, with the idea that this is part of the exemptions, so that, why would we exempt an activity from this if, for the different violations of noise ordinances? My personal opinion that this whole needs to be struck out. But that's me.
That's me.
3.
I agree. If we're gonna, yeah, we can't exempt a whole segment of the city from this ordinance.
Now, if this had another title on it, okay, but it says exemptions.
Well, should we move on, or
Yeah.
you want more discussion on this one?
Just delete it.
Let's move on, but this is also why I'm thinking this is probably not going to get done tomorrow.
No.
Well, no, we're close.
We are.
This was one of the bigger contentious ones, but maybe that'll come up tomorrow night. But so am I to keep it in, or am I to take it out?
Take it out.
Take it out.
Out.
Now,
That's 4. Okay.
And the animal section can go into the exemptions too, because it has its own measuring device.
I would recommend that the dog barking provision, starting on page 15, that goes all the way through 17, be taken and put into the exemptions.
correct.
Unless you want to hear from the chief on how it's working, but my information is it's working very well with the board that Mr. Powell has created.
And on 17, the squealing tires can go in the vehicle section.
Yes, we're finally there. So squealing tires exemption, okay?
My son would like that eliminated completely.
Yeah,
I'm sure he would.
a lot of kids would.
Okay, number 16, hobby activities. Also, it's construction. This one's kind of repetitive
Yes, it is.
of construction, so I suggest you take this, you don't even use this one.
Take it out.
You agree?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and unruly gathering and abatement of unruly gathering. I think those can be cited under the state statute, which is probably what would normally happen, so I suggest you not even have these in here.
Well, and 17 is subjective.
It is. Shall I take those out?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Because otherwise, we would have to get Gail out here all the time.
Going to top of page 18, and we're almost done. This language is in the code. Well, actually, this one is not. This one, I think you could leave in under A, because it talks about who's responsible. And so I suggest you keep that in. Same with B.
Yeah.
Those are standard that I've seen in other codes. So can I leave those in?
Yes.
Okay. Penalty. This is the next discussion. Right now, this is what the county has, and it kind of leaves it up to the prosecutor. Or you charge it as a misdemeanor, and then it can be reduced to a civil. It's a little different than our code on property maintenance. Our property maintenance code says the first violation is a civil violation, and it's a $350 fine. within 24 months of the next violation. If another one happens on the second, it's $600. And then the third violation is then criminal, and that could be a $1,000 fine. So it's up to you if you want to make them the same, so it's easier for staff, but it's just up to you, because right now, the way the county has it written is going to be a little different.
Joel, is there, with our current code, is there a time frame when you talk about the first, second, and third violation? Like, again, we go back to, you know, if I don't have a violation within 3 years, am I still subject to the second level of the violation, or does it start over, or is it just, you know, is there a time frame in there that says within 6 months, within a year?
Well, the current code under, like, for property maintenance, it's, if you have a second violation within 24 months of the first, it's still civil, and it's a $600 fine instead of $350. So on the third violation, though, that would be criminal within 24 months of the first two.
But if the second violation was 25 months out.
Then you start again the time clock.
Like that-
That's how you would work it.
I think that's what.
I'd rather see
Councilmember
it
Rizzi-
consistent.
2 years.
I think
Yeah,
consistent.
24 months, 2 years.
Yep.
That makes it consistent with the rest of the code.
Yeah.
Is that what you'd like to do?
Yeah.
Okay, I will do that. Okay, and then we get into,
The rest of it seems unneeded.
yeah, letter B. This is kind of also it's kind of embedded in the first one. I'd suggest you remove that one completely.
That's what I had.
And I suggest the same thing with the second, the D, because that wouldn't be consistent in how you want me to write it. Same with the E. And also as to F, cost recovery, Mr. Yuva could probably tell you how we get cost recovery for investigations.
Can we remove
if you-
section C?
I'd say get rid of, there is no, sorry about that, that C is, I guess C is gone.
Sorry, it's getting
We
late.
did, we got rid of it.
So F, I'd say get rid of also, and then,
And G too. Because we cover it.
yeah, G's on the last page, that's
Yep.
already covered.
Yep.
So that's what I would recommend. And you agree to that?
Yeah.
Where is B covered?
G is
B.
covered, G is covered in,
No, B.
D as in dog.
Nope, B is in
B
baby.
as in baby.
Are you suggesting that be taken out altogether, or is that covered somewhere else?
that would be covered in how you want me to rewrite it so that the first 2 violations are civil within 24 months. Is that okay?
So tell me again what your recommendation for B is. We have A in yellow, and then the first section in green is B. What is your recommendation for that?
Recommendation would be to rewrite A, so it would be consistent with the rest of the city code on the penalty, which right now, for example, for property code maintenance, the first violation is a civil fine of $350. The second one is $600, and that's within 24 months of the first one. Then the third would be a criminal violation within 24 months of the first, of the first 2. And that's a class 1 misdemeanor, a $1,000 fine.
And how does B play into that?
B talks about basically what I just said, if they're civil or they're criminal. So I think it's repetitive of how we want to change it.
B is talking about
He's talking about anonymous complaints.
a person filing a complaint when there's no form or summons has been issued.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right, it is. Okay, yes, so B talks about, are you going to find someone for basically making complaints that weren't acted on. And so the fine would be a civil fine of $250.
No.
So that's if the person makes 3 calls and they're not acted upon because there wasn't evidence. So now is that person considered basically making, not false alarms, but they're making calls that are not being proven? So that's what that provision is. Sorry, Krista, yes, you're right, that is a different issue. So,
I would hate to see that in there because some complaints that are made at the time that they're made may have some justification, but by the time the officer gets there, that particular situation may have stopped.
I agree.
I don't agree with that. Of
But
course,
at what point does it become, is it 3 times, is it 5 times, is it 20 times?
well, I
That
can,
somebody continues to call and complain that there's no action. At what point does it become harassment?
well, there's a harassment statute, and Mr. Yuba, do you want to address that real quick on harassment? What constitute harassment? How many calls it takes?
Evening. Normally harassment for calls, need to get up into the 4 or 5 range. There's also a city code statute for misuse of 911. So if they're calling 911 repeatedly for something that's not really happening or that we don't have other evidence of, we can cite them with that as well.
And so again, the question becomes, you have the same person that is continuing to call in, no action's been taken on the business, we're up to 10 calls, but they keep calling in anonymously. So again, how is it enforced if we allow these complaints to be anonymous?
We took that out.
Well, we talked about anonymous already, but,
And I don't think Krista ever really got a satisfying answer to it either. I think that's why she's coming back to it, so, which is her prerogative.
it is. So,
I got cut off. I'm sorry, I got disconnected during that conversation.
well, I think to prove a harassment case, if you say you find out who it is, then it's not anonymous anymore. And if you do see a pattern, at one point, the police could put it together a case that would say, okay, this is harassment.
But we took the anonymous part out.
Yeah, no, but they were talking about if it's, continually going and the police have recognized it as being a harassment calls, we also have rules that they can turn around and enforce.
we talk about this like it's never happened. I mean, we've lived this for the past 2 years, hundreds of calls. But yet nobody thought to go through harassment or nobody thought to look at it in any other way. But we sit there, we're trying to explain it away as if, hey, if this should happen, this is what we can do about
There
it.
was a lawsuit.
It turned
settled that.
into a lawsuit.
No, before that one.
One of the things that's one of the major objectives that I don't want us to lose sight in is that this noise ordinance does 2 goals that you've stated. 1, to bring it all together for clarity to help staff understand, and then 2, bring forth, for the first time ever in Apache Junction, an objective, measurable standard. I know we're talking about the calls and all of that. We'll have to work through that. But remember, that's a huge, huge step that we'll be able to, this is not above 65, not above 7, we're moving on.
Well, and plus the fact in this particular thing, it says an anonymous complainant from the same residence or commercial property. They have now ceased to be anonymous at that point.
That's true.
You've already got them. They're from the same property over and over again, so they're not anonymous anymore.
Right, and then we have the new standard of if we get 4 or 5, right, Eric? We can kind of keep track of those as well, too.
Okay. So I have a question from earlier on for the city clerk about the publishing. What would something like that typically cost? And that's still with the Arizona Republic because they're one of the only newspapers left. Is that correct?
Correct. So this would get published for 4 consecutive days. You're looking at thousands
Thousands of dollars.
if you publish the entire ordinance in the paper.
But we don't publish the entire ordinance.
Correct. We,
No.
we publish the ordinance that adopts the resolution.
Right.
This is still going to cost $500 to $1,000 or more.
Okay,
Mr. Mayor,
yes.
if I can just ask, it's on for tomorrow night for a public hearing. I don't know what you want to do. Tomorrow night is obviously election night, but if you want me to bring this back in the form that you want to vote on it, I can do that. But I need to know that, so we can do that, or you can continue it, or you can
Continue it
do whatever you want.
Continue it
But I'd
to
like
the
to know what you'd like to do so that you could vote on it tomorrow night if I bring it back in the form that we've talked about tonight.
What did
Joel,
we decide to do with B?
Continue it to the first one in September.
I'm sorry, what do you mean B?
The number B in this section,
We
I'm sorry, I
decided
thought we
to
were done
delete
talking
it.
to
about,
delete it.
I thought we said delete it.
And some of the arguments were to delete it. It's really hard to, because if a police officer is delayed or is not there, and by the time the cop gets there, the noise could be, gone. Basically, that's one of the arguments to take this away. Is that correct?
Well, and also because
Well, I can
it
understand.
reads that it's from a residence,
Well, you
so
could take some
therefore,
wording out of it, but, but some of the reasons here, is this true? Is one of the main reasons on why this shouldn't be in there is because you can't, determine if the officer's gonna be there at the precise time the noise is going on, therefore, if he shows up 10 minutes after it quits, there's nothing going on, so therefore there's no complaint, right?
So you want to charge that person that made the call when legitimately the noise was going on? You want to basically gag them or fine them $250
Well,
for
I wouldn't say,
calling and making a legitimate complaint. I mean, how many people have police scanners that know when the cop is coming out and stuff stops? I mean, how often does that happen?
after the
Chief.
third instance.
Yeah,
for one.
eventually.
It happens a lot, right?
After the third instance, it does state to do that, but at what point does it become, I'm calling about a noise issue that is just a continuance nuisance to, I'm just gonna be a jerk because of some 30-minute noise thing gonna go on, and it's gonna be over in 30 minutes anyways.
don't you think that the police chief and his staff would have a clue as to this is happening and would make some decisions themselves?
Well,
Do
this has
we
nothing to do with the
dictate-
police
Sure
chief.
it does.
This isn't a
Sure it
matter
does.
of putting the police's, common sense in question. It comes to the point, if it literally comes to the point that by the time an officer gets there, whether it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes, the noise is gone, where is that line drawn? I mean, oh, it was here, but now it's not. But I'm gonna call every single day, it's here, but by the time anybody gets here, it's not.
Is it possible to say in it that, if you've after, I'll say, a third instances that, looking at the, say, number of complaints for what was the word that we used for when you're using the different, for false claim, false,
Harassment?
thank you, for harassment, be considered for underneath the harassment side of the city
That
code.
would be a
If
lot
it was
better
ever
than a fine.
enforced, I guess I would agree with that.
But, question for you, maybe I'm missing the point here, but if a person, whether it's another business owner, whether it's a residence, whatever it is, if they make the call and the police show up 10 minutes later and there's no noise, the police can't cite or warn anybody because there's no noise, correct?
Correct.
And so the person who the complaint is against won't even, there won't be
reported.
there won't be anything on them to say, the police aren't gonna go and say, stop doing it, because there was nothing to stop.
Exactly.
Okay, so why do we,
Why even make the call? Why even go out there?
Why to make the call? Because there was noise at the time.
Well, there's noise at a time, all the time. I mean, the purpose behind this thing is like your neighbor's got a jackhammer tearing up his driveway for 4 hours straight. You know, it's the kind of thing where it's like, I have a very short window when I hear this noise to call the cops, to get them out here to take a decibel read. I mean, where does common sense come to play and be like, hey, I'm realizing that this is a very short window here. I'm realizing that this isn't something that carries on to the point where even if an officer was 10 minutes into the call before we got there, it would still be going on. You know, it's like the chasing down the fireworks. Hey, my neighbor's blowing off fireworks, but the noise is gone. What did the cops say? I can't help you.
Right.
You know, what can we do? I mean, all you're doing is having us chase our tail at this point. If you've got someone built a firing range in their backyard and they've got nothing but people coming in every day firing guns, you've got yourself a valid noise complaint because it's happening through an extended period amount of time. And if the whole argument is based on there's this real small window that if the cop just doesn't get there in time, he's not going to hear the noise anymore. That seems to me a little bit,
So you wanna
splitting hairs.
You want to legislate common sense? I don't think we can do that. I don't think we can.
Well,
Or to penalize someone making a legitimate complaint just because it's happened repetitively. You're punishing the person that's already suffered the noise issue. I mean, that's like,
suffered?
absolutely.
Well, I
Well,
think the
pick a
operative
different
word there,
word.
Gail, was legitimate. And
Yeah.
what Mr. Schroeder is talking about is an illegitimate complaint or a momentary complaint
I'm trying to
that
argue
he
that.
feels a
ahead.
person should probably just take a deep breath and wait to see if it's continuous before they call. But the problem is this doesn't address the anonymous person and their reason for calling. And I don't know how you can legislate that. You know?
I think what Robert's trying to say is, if somebody calls and makes a complaint against the same neighbor or business repeatedly, and it always works out that by the time the police get there, that the noise is no longer happening, number one, that's not detrimental to somebody's peace. That, like Robert said, a jackhammer going for, 4 or 5 hours is one thing, but calling repeatedly to make a complaint and, by the time the police got here, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, the noise was no longer happening. Number one, that's an issue because that's not somebody that's having their peace ruined by a neighbor or business. Number two, at what point, I think what Robert's trying to say is at what point, what threshold do we have in place? Is it going to be 3 calls? Is it going to be 5 calls? Is it going to be 10 calls from the same person? This is taking staff time and police time to go out repeatedly if there's no citation or warning given. It becomes apparent that there's a problem other than the complaint of noise. So I think what he's saying is, why are we not going to have a stopgap or a threshold that says, okay, we now have a different issue here between neighbors or between a business or whatnot, where a person is just calling, and there's not been an issue with a violation or a warning or a citation given. What's the threshold? Are we going to just let it go on?
Why don't we let the police address it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think what Robert was alluding to earlier, and I think what he was alluding to earlier is it has been an issue. It's been an issue for the last 2 years, and nothing's happened with these calls when no citation was ever issued.
Never a citation.
Never. So it has been an issue, and without having some kind of way to regulate it, now it puts our police officers in the middle of the mix without having, if we don't have something in writing that says, okay, we're not going to continue to take 20 calls here when no citation or even a warning has been given.
Arnold?
Yes.
Mayor, council members, I can assure you that if this were to happen, we're the first ones to file false reporting because we understand it's wasting our time, it's wasting our resources. We can have one major accident in the city and it can tap the entire squad. So over the years, we've learned to recognize who's abusing the system, and we'll be the first in line to file those charges.
So this is really a non-issue as far as you're concerned?
Well, it hadn't been an issue in the past. I don't believe it's going to be an issue in the future because we do have officers that do have common sense, and they use the common sense daily. And I believe if something like this were to happen, we would recognize it rather quickly based on CAD history and things like that, and we would certainly take action.
And you already have a mechanism to take care of it where we don't need to be fining.
That would be a policy decision that council would need to make, whether we need it or not.
Did you read lips?
Well, I think Council Member Schroeder was alluding to that. I think that's what he just said over the last 2 years that happened with, there's been no citation given to a specific business. I don't remember how many calls, 100, 500, 1,200, how many calls? And there was no citation. I think what Robert was alluding to is we've already seen this and nothing has happened. And so to keep that from happening again, that's where my concern comes in.
Changing this to the decibel readers changes this. And with that in place, this is almost a moot point. And you do have the mechanism in place that if it is a repetitive call without any findings, you already have a way to handle it.
But it hasn't been.
Pardon me?
But it has not been up to this point.
That was the different rules.
That's why we're changing this. Thank you.
Okay, anything else tonight?
So what do we do? Are we asking Joel to come back tomorrow night with, because we made a heck of a lot of changes here tonight.
Yeah,
To have to, we won't even see it. I mean, what?
Yeah, I don't see how this can happen tomorrow
No.
night.
do I vote? No.
So tomorrow night will just be a public hearing then on what's
Yes.
here, but the public that hasn't seen this should probably be reminded, hey, go back and watch the meeting and we'll set this for a different date. Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
And I'd like to thank staff and Joel and Melissa. This was an incredible amount of work in a short period of time. And it sucked just reading through it, let alone putting it all together, was just an unbelievable amount of work, and thank you.
Oh, thank you. But I do want to know, you want me to bring back a red line in addition to, so a highlighted version again? So you know what I took out and where I,
Oh, I'd love to see
If
that.
you,
Okay.
if you can.
so that plus a clean copy. And when do you want to do that? Do you want to make that the 18th?
Yeah, I was gonna say not tomorrow.
Okay, so tomorrow night you'll have to continue it then by motion to a date certain.
Will there still be a public hearing? Or
Yes.
There has to be a public
Has to be a
hearing
public
because
hearing.
it has been advertised.
Okay.
So anybody who wants to speak can speak.
But they would speak on what was presented to us tonight.
They could speak on, yes, if they watched it, or you can remind them, well, we made changes, you need to go back and read that, and we'll have another public hearing.
Okay.
Just let everyone know that you're gonna bring it back. Did we say on the 18th for sure then?
Well, that's up to council. I don't know if you want to bring it back on the 18th. I think Mr. Schroeder wanted to have this done by September, before September, as I recall.
Well, do we need another work session to review the changes, or?
That's up to you.
I'm asking, because there was a lot of changes here, guys, tonight.
Well, again, I was targeting September to try to make it,
Effective?
so the county wouldn't have to come in. We were
Right.
taking care of things. But since we all kind of agree that the county thing's on the back burner and we want to take some time to make sure this is done the way it should be done, I mean, I don't care if you bring it back in November.
Well, but if we pass it on the 18th with a 6-1 vote or higher, the emergency clause takes place and it takes effect.
So maybe
Well-
work session on the 17th.
Well, hold on a second. I can take the emergency clause out if that's causing problems.
No, I'm just saying that if that passes with a 6-1 or 7-0 vote, with the emergency clause, if we pass it on the 18th, then it takes effect on whatever day, the 19th or whatever.
It would take, yes, it's 30 days, so, but if you want that taken out, I can take it out too. That would uncomplicate it, and so it's 30 days. You can, that's up to you. And,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can decide that later.
okay,
Okay, so we'll be adjourned until tomorrow.